Besides that, chapter 65, verse 4 of the Quran allows Muslims, it lays down rules on how to divorce a prepubescent girl after marrying her and having sex with her. So it gives rules on how to divorce a prepubescent girl that you've already had sex with. So obviously the Quran is allowing sex with prepubescent girls, right?
And that is obviously a conflicted interpretation, one that contradicts the Quran on this issue. Hello, and welcome back to The Impactful Scholar. I'm your host, Dr. Javad T. Hashmi. Previously, we talked about how the hadith, or so-called hadith, that's attributed to Aisha, that she was 9 years old when she was married to the Prophet, is not historically reliable according to historical critical scholarship. But Islamophobes and anti-Muslim critics will say, but yeah, the Quran itself advocates child marriage. To make this claim, they go to verse 65:4 of the Quran to claim that it at least implicitly allows for prepubescent girls to get married, otherwise how could they get divorced? However, this is not a convincing interpretation. I'm going to be referring here to the argument raised by the Muslim academic Yasmin Amin in revisiting the issue of minor marriages. I found her argument to be very convincing. So let's look at verse 65:4. It says, "As for your women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, their waiting period is 3 months." So basically, if a woman gets a divorce, she has to wait a certain period before she remarries to make sure that she's not pregnant from the previous marriage. This is for obvious reasons. Now, what if she's at the age of menstruation? Well, sometimes it's not clear. Is she really past the age of menstruation or not? Therefore, to err on the side of caution, you're told to wait 3 months. As for those who are pregnant, their waiting period ends with delivery. The Islamophobes will claim that the part that says those who have not menstruated as well refers to prepubescent girls. Granted, this is an interpretation that many of the medieval exegetes took. They included prepubescent girls in this phrase. However, we should point out that modern historical critical scholars have long argued for a disjunction between the Quran's original meaning to its original audience and the medieval exegetes. So we shouldn't think that there's this continuous, unbroken chain of transmission from the Quran's initial audience to the medieval exegetes. And there's a lot of scholarship about this. I'll talk about this more in detail later, but suffice to say is just because the medieval exegetes came to a certain ruling does not mean that that's the most obvious interpretation or correct interpretation of the verse. In fact, my own research shows how the medieval exegetes and jurists came to the Quran with their own legal and theological imperatives which they sought to impose on the Quran, and they used certain hermeneutical strategies to do so. Again, we'll talk about this more in detail later, but let's take a look at this passage itself. I argue, along with, of course, Yasmin Amin, who preceded me in this, that this phrase, those who have not menstruated, does not refer to prepubescent girls and cannot refer to them because the verse says nisa, or women. Nowhere in the Quran is the word nisa used to refer to girls. Girls is banat. Nowhere in the Quran is nisa used for girls. It's not in Arabic to use nisa for girls. So the way this passage should actually be understood is, as for your women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, their waiting period is 3 months. And those women who have not menstruated as well. It's actually talking about the early stage where you're not sure if the woman is pregnant or not. Nowadays, after a missed menstrual cycle or 2 missed menstrual cycles, you can take a pregnancy test and it tests positive and you say, okay, we're pregnant. But in the pre-modern period, you didn't have that luxury, so you had to wait till you showed obvious signs of pregnancy, which could take some time. You'd have to be obviously gravid. And there are all sorts of stories, I'm sure you've seen them on TV, where some women go into the 4th month of pregnancy and then realize that they're pregnant when they go to the ER. Some even reach all the way to delivery and don't realize they're pregnant. So what this passage in its most intuitive reading is saying or referring to are those women in that early period of uncertainty where is it just a missed period or two, an irregular cycle, or is it the early phase of pregnancy? And that's why you would hold at least 3 months before you decide to move forward. That is the more intuitive interpretation of this passage. It's referring to women who have irregular cycles, and I think irregular cycles, especially meaning missed cycles, when it's a potential pregnancy. That is the more sensible reading of this passage. Now, there is even stronger proof that this passage is not referring to prepubescent girls, because in another verse of the Quran, there's a very clear indication that the age of marriage is linked to the age of adulthood or to maturity. If we took verse 65:4 to mean what the Islamophobes are saying, then in that case, there would be no minimum age of marriage. And that's what they're trying to imply. Yet we know there's a minimum age of marriage because of verse 4:6 in the Quran, which says, "Test the competence of the orphans until they reach a marriageable age." So we already know off the bat that there is a marriageable age, and the word used is nikah. Well, when is that marriageable age? The verse continues. Then, if you feel they are capable of sound judgment, return their wealth to them. So it's linking the age of marriage with the age of maturity. When you reach rushd, or sound judgment, the age of maturity. And the way we know that is, that's when you get your wealth. Just like in America today, if you have a trust, you don't get access to that trust until you turn 18 years of age, you become an adult. At that time, the state decides you can be handed over your wealth and you can dispose of it as you see fit. Before that, you're a minor and you're deemed incompetent to utilize your wealth, even though it is your wealth. Similarly here, in the Quran, the orphans have certain wealth and there's a caretaker for that wealth. It's only when they reach the marriageable age, which is the age of maturity, the age when they're deemed to be sufficiently mature in order to dispose of their property, which is the age of adulthood. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily 18 years of age, obviously, in that in that pre-modern context, but it is the age of adulthood during that time when societies deem them to be sufficiently of sound mind to dispose of their wealth. So we now know that the marriageable age, according to the Quran, is the age of maturity. Unfortunately, the medieval exegetes basically read these passages in the best possible way for the benefits of the men and the worst possible way for the women. This is unfortunately a bias that many scholars, including some Muslim feminist scholars, have convincingly argued for. In this case, they took the verses of the Quran to allow child marriage, or what we would call prepubescent. Now, they didn't allow you to consummate the marriage until she reached a level of sexual maturity, but they at least allowed betrothal, that's a tough word, and marriage, but you just had to consummate that marriage when she was sexually mature. Now, but they divorced that sexual maturity. They just made it to when she could withstand sexual intercourse without harm being done to her, but they separated that from the age of maturity or of sound judgment. So they would often allow a man to engage in sexual intercourse, but still not hand over the woman's or the girl's wealth to her. And that is obviously a conflicted interpretation, one that contradicts the Quran on this issue. There is no reason for us to take the medieval exegetical interpretation as the one that accurately portrays what the Quran was saying to its original audience. And in this case, that is clearly not the case. And the Quran is saying that there's a minimum age of marriage, and it's linking it to the age of maturity or sound judgment. So this Islamophobic trope goes to the wayside. And I think we can now move on to a different topic. Thank you very much. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. We're really trying to grow this channel and bring you high quality content. Make sure to tell your friends. And if you really feel inclined, please do contribute to MPAC. Thank you very much. See you next time.